Hello, and welcome to Change the Face of Yoga, teaching toddlers through golden oldies. I'm very excited to be talking to lots of yoga teachers who will explain their passion for teaching yoga to students with different ages, physical fitness levels, wellness levels, and different goals. They will explain the benefits of yoga for these students and will be including teacher tips and pose modifications. I am Stephanie Cunningham of Yoga Lightness, and I've been teaching over 50s for 10 years. So this area is my passion and the passion of many other yoga teachers that you will be listening to in this series. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get started. This is episode 21 of Changing the Face of Yoga. And basically, it's a compilation of the previous 3 podcast on the future of yoga. So I bring in clips from all of our guests and give you my take on what I think the future of yoga might be like. Enjoy. So why does yoga need to change? Well, first off, everything changes, and in 10 years there will be changes to yoga. The point is, what will they be? What will we want them to be? How will that change what yoga is, or perhaps it won't change it at all? So this is the kind of discussion we had with our 3 guests, and now I'm going to recap that and pull out some specific things that were said, because I think that they're important. I know that the public perception of yoga is female, white, slim, and financially comfortable. And that is what we see in advertising, and that is what we see on a lot of selfies, and it becomes the public idea of what you do in yoga. That it is basically for fitness, it is to become very flexible, it is to become stronger, and in that public perception, what it does is it makes it very exclusive. And people who don't fit that model, that picture, feel that they can't do yoga. And yet, those students, we all know, could benefit from yoga in different ways. Are they willing to come to yoga because they would feel that it's not for them? And I know from all of the teachers and therapists that I interview on the podcast that yes, yoga is really flexible, I know, a pun, sorry, and can help a lot of different people with a lot of different goals, with a lot of different bodies, with a lot of different issues, and that teachers out there are doing that. I've talked to people who have veterans with trauma issues, and children, and autistic children, and people that are pregnant or just had a baby, or seniors, or people that have weight issues, and people that have PTSD, and I can go on and on and on, and I know that all of that is happening out there. But the problem is, it's not happening in the public perception, and it's not happening widespread. Okay, there's just a few people out there doing all this great stuff, and I applaud them, and I'm really excited that I can tell the rest of you about them. But these are small and little ripples in the pond, and they aren't really affecting a lot of people, nor are they coming into the public consciousness, which is really the issue. So, is it always going to be this way? Are we always going to be labeled, shall we say, as a fitness exercise kind of thing? Or is there a way to expand that and really tell the rest of the world and all of our potential students that yoga has something for everyone, or almost everyone? So let's start with what's the research saying out there. So we had 3 previous guests. We had Christine Coveri-Weber of Subtle Yoga, and her areas of interest included the way that yoga can help people with mental, emotional issues like anxiety, depression, trauma, and also how yoga fits into nationwide health goals to become a more healthy country, individual, and how yoga is very good for prevention in the overall population health area. Linda Baird of Body-Mind Integrative Therapy has been learning and teaching and sharing her knowledge about ethics with the yoga community for at least the past 10 years. And given the rather shocking information about many of the sexual assaults in yoga in the past 3 or 4 years, how we act ethically in the classroom and in the training room has become very, very important. And Linda has some very specific things that we can do and how we can act ethically. Tom Myers of Anatomy Trains brought his knowledge of somatics research to the podcast and talked about what new things have been found out and how that really accentuates the value of yoga. And as yoga becomes more and more valuable and becomes one modality that is accepted by many, then the head of regulation pops up, and what are we going to do about that? So let's go forward, see what the newest research has to say in regard to yoga.
We can provide primary and secondary prevention that can help people to not necessarily go down that trajectory, because that's really where yoga shines, is as a primary prevention strategy.
This is the century that we're really turning our attention to consciousness, and consciousness of the body is part of that.
So our guests have brought up two really important points. One, that yoga has a real niche in population health as it flows down to the individual, which is that prevention, getting to people that may have risk for diseases, whether they're physical, emotional, or mental risk. Yoga has some really excellent tools to help people with those. And that's really what it's saying about yoga, is that it's a holistic system. And yes, it does work on the asanas, and it does work in the pranayama and the energy fields, and it also works in meditation. And those three together can be used in a variety of situations and with people with a variety of risk, and that they can be helpful. And it is not just to become stronger or more flexible, but actually becomes more healthy. And this is also informed by the somatics research that Tom talked about, which is that they are looking at how movement affects the body. And yes, obviously, it affects the bones, it affects the fascia, it affects the muscles, but it does so much more than that. The right kind of movement actually goes deep, deep, deep into the cell, into the DNA, and it makes some genes turn on and some genes turn off. So people with issues that really have very little to do with muscles or bones or fascia can get some real benefit from yoga because of this genetic turning on and turning off kind of stuff. Now, running does the same thing. It turns on and turns off genes. Probably not the same ones, but some of them. And so movement is really critical to our health. And it's critical to all of our health, to all of the systems in the body, the endocrine systems, the pulmonary systems, the circulatory systems. They're saying there's so much relationship between the gut and how well the brain works. So all of these systems, obviously, are very well connected in the body. And when we do movement, as we do in yoga, then we are taking all of that movement and all of the pranayama and the meditation, and we're moving the whole system, the whole body, the whole mind to a healthier state. And that's the real miraculous thing, if you'd like, about yoga, is that the way it's been put together, it's a system to promote health. And that becomes a very valuable tool for yoga teachers and yoga therapists. So the exciting kinds of research in somatics is really proving, although we probably as teachers and therapists didn't need it proved, that how valuable and how yoga promotes health. And then Christine's points about how we can really bring up the health of the entire nation by working with people who have risk, if we're yoga teachers, or by working with people who are more ill as yoga therapists, who are more intensively trained in diseases and conditions and what all, so that we are an integral part of the medical system that has some really positive value to that system. First of all, we're kind of on the cheap end, I mean, we can have 3 or 4, 10 people in our classes instead of an individual client. We are, the tools that we use don't have a lot of expense. We are not giving people drugs, and we're asking them to move in certain ways. We're asking them to breathe in certain ways. We're asking them to relax and release in certain ways. And all of that is very, let's say, it promotes health. Maybe that's a better way to put it. And so we are at the cusp of really showing people how much more yoga is and that yoga can do than just be another fitness modality. And all of this research, which is really, really very exciting, is letting us know what we've all known inside, but really didn't have, scientific proof of it, which is yoga is a health system. It promotes health, and it deserves its place in the health system to do what it does best. It's really exciting to think how the research is melding with yoga to give us proof for outside people that yoga has a great deal of value in these systems, in these health systems. So that's one really exciting thing that our guests brought to us, this kind of knowledge. And how are we going to work within this new system? Christine has some very specific ideas about that.
When we're starting to see this kind of evidence base, it makes sense to me that the next step is figuring out how to integrate yoga professionals into the healthcare system.
That's a big one. And when you say yoga professionals, are you talking primarily about yoga therapists or yoga teachers also?
I think there's a place for both, so if you're talking about, if you've got somebody who has, let's say, diabetes, and they're on some kind of, maybe they're even on dialysis at this point, but they're really sick, and they maybe on top of that have metabolic syndrome or heart disease or spinal stenosis or obesity on top of it. Like, I don't expect a 200-hour yoga teacher to have a clue what to do with that person, but a well-trained yoga therapist should at least have some place where they know how to start and can interact with other healthcare professionals that person is working with. So, when you're talking about really sick people that are really sick, it makes a lot of sense to employ yoga therapists. But let's go upstream. So this is a metaphor that's often used in public health. They talk about upstream, downstream. Downstream is when somebody is very, very sick and they're in the hospital and it's very expensive to treat that person. They're often in a lot of pain and it's just sad. Upstream is you're going to the kids, you're going to people, really upstream is the kids, but even before you get that far upstream, just going upstream a little bit is looking at people who have risk factors for diabetes, but maybe haven't developed it yet. That kind of intervention makes a lot of sense. Even yoga teachers, I think many yoga teachers have the skills to deal with people who don't yet have chronic pain or spinal stenosis or, full-blown diabetes, but are looking to be a little bit more healthy and a little bit more fit and reduce their stress levels. So yes, there is certainly a place for yoga teachers in the system, but it's more upstream. It's more prevention oriented.
Mm-hmm.
So Christine sees a role for all of us, yoga teachers and yoga therapists in the future, and that we will be more of an integral part of the health system if we choose to. Obviously, fitness yogas will continue, and there will be people that will prefer to teach that type of yoga, and that's great because that's part of yoga also. In addition to working in the prevention risk area, Tom thinks that we'll also be working in a lot of different places than we do now. So let's listen to him.
The yoga industry is, I would suspect that the yoga industry is going to find itself fitting into more and more social niches. But what it also means is that we'll be moving out into other niches. In other words, yoga for more elderly people, yoga for pregnant people, yoga for young and fit people, yoga for people who are about to, going through traumatic things like divorce, or yoga for grief. I can imagine, I'm just making this up, but I can imagine all kinds of ways in which yoga will be applied in particular institutions, in schools, in prisons. I have a friend who's a yoga teacher who spends her weekends teaching in the local state prison, and I'm sure she's doing a lot of good for people who would otherwise be wrapped up in that. And so yoga has, I think, a lot of applications that people will be using that in order to calm themselves, in order to get their minds ready for tests, in order to stay mobile while they're aging. I think there's just a whole lot of applications that this kind of research will have. I don't think that it will, let me try to be a little controversial for your listeners here. I don't think that all of this is going to look like traditional yoga coming out of, what we were doing with Iyengar in the 1970s. I think yoga will take on different forms to fit with the 20th century. The people who were developing the yoga asanas, even Iyengar himself, but the progenitors of Iyengar and other people of his generation, were trying to do this with very, very different people. The Brahmins of the 1800s or 1700s in India weren't facing the same problem that kids who are growing up in the electronic era are facing today. So we might have to develop quite a different yoga to answer the needs of the kids from this era.
So what did we learn from our guests, Christine and Tom? That the perception of yoga as a very valuable support for good health rests on a foundation of solid research. Yes, those of us that work in yoga know that instinctively, but now we have some outside proof that helps us talk to other people about it. Yoga is beneficial for both mental and emotional issues, as well as physical issues, in addition to helping build strength and increasing flexibility. Yoga in the future will probably be offered at a lot of different sites, like prisons, hospitals, schools, retirement villages, rehab centers, all of those kinds of areas that actually there are yoga therapists and yoga teachers in those areas now, but it probably will become much more common and much more accepted by the public. And yoga will look very different from what it is now as we all begin to niche a bit more, find the area that we want to delve into. I think we'll need a bit more education and training to become a really viable part of the health system. So our training probably will be slightly different. And all of us have a role in this new world of yoga. We will be able to help people who have risk. We will be able to help people that are really quite ill. So we'll have a whole spectrum of individuals who are trained to help in specific areas, in specific sites, in specific ways. And it will become more of a health modality in the public's perception. And that's great. There's still room for fitness, but let's also really use the really complexity of yoga to help population of countries, the population of groups, the population of individuals, because I think that's what most yoga teachers want to do. So now we're going to go on. We're going to talk about something squishy that doesn't really have much to do with research. It's about ethics. And ethics has been an issue for us in the past couple of years. A lot of newspaper articles and reports about different individuals who have taken their power as either a trainer or a teacher and used it in unethical ways. Now we're going to go to Linda Berg and talk to her about, first, what is ethics, and secondly, how we should act ethically within the classroom and within the training room.
Ethics is standing in your strength while staying in your heart.
So we are standing in our power, and that basically means that we have more power than the client or the student. And how we wield that power determines whether we're acting ethically. Are we trying to wield the power in a way that is beneficial for the student or the client, or are we wielding the power to feed our own ego? And that's basically the problem that we've seen, is that too many people with power in the yoga community have used it to feed their own ego. So instead, what should we be doing?
That when we're in a teacher position, that it's like it's a step up in power due to this authority that we have as teachers, that we actually have more power in the relationship. We have to focus on relationship. That yoga often, especially I think yoga in the West, it's become very task oriented, do this pose, do this breathing style, do whatever. So it's more focused on task or move your body in this way, when sometimes what we need to do is focus a little bit on relationship and track what's happening in relationship.
So Linda's take is that in the West, unfortunately, the yoga has become very task-oriented. And I kind of agree with that. What are the goals for our classes? Do we want a series of perfect asanas from a series of perfect students? Or do we want each person to find that place that makes sense for their bodies? The notion of a class of perfect asanas is upheld by the teachings on adjustment. And that brings up another ethical question. Is it ethical to adjust people into the perfect asana, regardless of their body types or how the student's body is formed? Touching another human being has its own issues from many perspectives. What is, or is there, an ethical stance on adjustments? Let's hear from Linda.
This isn't about being able to accomplish a task. It's about being in your body and understanding what is right for your body. We have to be really skillful about how we come to people with adjustments. And do people want to be touched? And tracking, is it appropriate? Asking for permission.
And one of the last issues that we talked about in the ethics of yoga is being accountable. In other words, we're human. We make mistakes. How do we repair a mistake that has occurred to a student? And so Linda's going to discuss the barriers to being accountable and how we get past those barriers.
Along the vein of kind of underuse of power is about barriers to being able to step into our accountability when we make a mistake. And inevitably we make mistakes. We're human. It's what happens. But I just think it's important because that is an underuse of power. I think we often equate accountability with blame and shame. When for me, accountability, when I can be accountable and really step into it and say, oh, I made a mistake and work to repair whatever it was that happened, it's incredibly powerful. So I think I would just want to say that, I think it's important for people to explore some of the barriers that are there to accountability, and we all have them.
So to end up our discussion about ethics, it's probably important to think about a couple of things. One, the overuse of power. We're using the power in a way to increase our own ego rather than to be beneficial to our students or clients. The underuse of power, which also was an interesting discussion about, given the culture of yoga, a lot of people are very reluctant to say, yes, I have power, I have more power than my students, and then very reluctant to look at how they're being accountable because they refuse to believe that they have that ability to be powerful and to make mistakes that might be very detrimental to their students or clients. What we're looking at in ethics is it's a relationship based. If you are in a relationship with someone, and I would really recommend that you listen to Linda's entire podcast because she talks about some very excellent tips on how you can build a relationship with a student in small classes, in big classes. And I think that relationship issue is really, really critical to acting ethically. And then to be accountable for your actions, because we certainly, because of our power, we have the authority and the ability to be very harmful to our students or our clients. So building a relationship, acknowledging that we have power, and trying to repair when we have done something wrong is the ethical way to act in every situation, but definitely in yoga. So what did we learn from our guest? The research is showing that yoga is far more valuable than probably even us as teachers and therapists realized, and that it has a whole body effect. Secondly, yoga has a real place in the health system of countries. That yoga is the preventative measure that can be used for almost all populations, for each individual student, regardless of what their issues and or their goals might be. And if we can decrease risk, as yoga teachers can do in most cases, or if we can truly help someone who's quite ill, as yoga therapists are trained to do, we are an integral and valuable part of the health system. Fitness yoga will continue, but what will happen in our guest views is that yoga will become more niche driven, so that different populations are able to access yoga that is particularly good for their issues, that yoga will go out into the community and will be part of the institutions of a society. We already are quite a bit in schools, prisons, retirement villages, rehab centers, hospitals. So all of those areas will be able to be accessed by yoga teachers and yoga therapists, so that we can continue to spread the benefits of yoga. Working on developing a relationship with our students while acknowledging our power that we have in this relationship and being willing to be accountable and trying to repair any damage we may have done inadvertently is the way to go forward on our ethical responsibilities to our students. So what does that all come down to? Well, it comes down to the fact that yoga is becoming, in many eyes, more and more valuable. And when things become more and more valuable, then you have some issues about who actually gets to do this. And this brings us to the point of our discussions in the community about regulation. Now, Tom Myers has some rather strong opinions about regulation, and so I'm going to play you some clips from his podcast and see what you think about regulating yoga.
Is that the industry in which I'm talking about, yoga teachers and yoga therapists, has to first start regulating itself. In other words, forming a committee and figuring out what the educational standards are, the ethical standards are, whether you're allowed to sleep with your students or not, or whether, talking to them is ethical. All of these things have to be worked out. We in bodywork took some of the things from psychology and we applied those to bodywork. Well, some of them applied and some of them didn't, because psychiatrists and psychologists, for instance, are not touching their clients, and we are.
Right.
And that's a different kind of animal, and so yoga has a different set of responsibilities. But I really have great sympathy with those people who say, I don't want to be regulated. Who the hell wants to be regulated? But if you don't get regulated, the thing is that somebody sets up down the street from you. They're doing terrible yoga. They're injuring people, or they're psychologically damaging people. And if you don't have a yoga teachers association or a yoga teacher licensing, then you have no recourse to say that person isn't doing good yoga therapy. So the trouble, it's bad to be regulated, but it's worse not to be regulated.
Yeah.
And I think that yoga teachers and yoga therapists will find that in the long run, their interests will be served by having a standard that everybody has to meet, and then you can call yourself a proper yoga therapist, and then that's based on research, or anything that is based on my experience with what happened in several industries that I've been involved with, and the bodywork one, that it is better to have regulation, and then it doesn't stop people from doing different things, but it means that if somebody who's really not able to do this work, not capable of doing this work, or taking this work to bad effect, won't ruin everybody's reputation in town. In other words, you have recourse. And if somebody in the public gets hurt, they have a recourse to go and say, this person did me wrong. And then, there's a board and things like that. It's a very, you wish you didn't have to do it, but it really is something to be considered.
So what are the benefits of self-regulation? The IYAT, there we go, in the U.S. has started regulating yoga therapists in the U.S., where, according to their website, and I quote, the primary aim of this self-regulatory initiative is to promote high-quality yoga therapy education that produces safe and effective practitioners. And I know yoga therapists in the U.S., and yes, they are, putting together their qualifications and having them certified by this association. I think really, if we've come to the point where we need to be regulated, and I'm pretty sure that we have, then self-regulation is the way to go. And the reason is, it can be a regulation that is much more nuanced than the alternative, which would be a government body of some kind. And because the government body probably has minimal knowledge about yoga, they will have a checklist, and the checklist says you have to have 50 hours of this and 20 hours of that, and you have to do these 5 things. Okay, that's fine on the average, but perhaps, some teacher trainer group wants to do something a little different, that they have a different niche that they want to fill. And if you have someone from yoga who knows yoga really well and is doing the review, then you have someone that you can talk to and say, look, this is why we're doing it. This is our reasons, A, B, and C. And a person that's familiar and involved in yoga will be able to make a better judgment about whether that's a good exception to the rule. And so then you can start using what apparently our guests think, which is that yoga will become much more diverse. It will, affect a lot bigger group of people with lots of different issues, and it'll be in very different places. And it's probably not going to look like it looks now, because it doesn't need to. my classes for seniors look very different, I'm sure, from classes for fitness, because I am catering to their bodies and to their needs. Self-regulation does have some drawbacks. As Tom said, nobody really likes to be regulated. But there are also some very good reasons why we should contemplate regulation in a more positive way. And let's talk to Tom a little bit more about that.
If you didn't go for regulation, you don't have a seat at that table. And when you don't have a seat at that table, the occupational therapist can come into, say, the legislature and whoever's making the laws, the regulatory boards, and say, these yoga therapists are injuring people and we need to take this back into occupational therapy. And if you haven't been at the table, you can say, but nothing's going to happen because you don't have a seat at that table, so you can get legislated out of existence if you try to exempt yourself from regulation. This doesn't take place over a year.
We've talked to 3 different people. We've learned about new research. We've learned how to act more ethically. We've talked about what yoga is going to look like in the future. Probably not much like it looks now. And that there's room for all of us in the health system. Yoga therapists and yoga teachers. And we probably are working our way towards regulation and need to have some very serious conversations about what that looks like. So I hope you've enjoyed this series about what the future of yoga might be. And tell your friends if you liked it. And thanks for listening. Thank you for listening to the podcast 21. And I'm going to do something a little different. I think it was an important series of podcasts about what the future of yoga might look like. And so I'm going to have a little challenge. And the first thing is you have to go and like my Facebook page, Changing the Face of Yoga. And then there will be a series of questions from the podcast. And you can comment or private message me or whatever with your answers. And those that are right will go into the hat to receive a prize. And the prize is a Yoga Master mat. Now, I have these, and I have them for my students. And my students like them so much that they've actually stopped bringing their own mats and want to use these mats. My studio has wooden floors, and these are double mats, so they're extremely stable, and I have found them to be excellent mats. So I want to share them with you. So what you need to do is, 1, like my Facebook page, Changing the Face of Yoga. Give me the answers, and give me some way to contact you, either through the message or the comments, and then I will pick a person to win and send them a really lovely brand new mat. So thank you for listening.